From a dark and turbulent time in the making of England, a brilliant light comes down to us today. The Lindisfarne Gospels. The Lindisfarne Gospels is one of the world's great masterpieces of manuscript painting. This wonderful book was made only a century after Christianity first came to Anglo-Saxon England, over 1,300 years ago. Its 258 decorated vellum leaves contain a complete copy of the four Gospels in Latin, with illustrations of their authors. Matthew, the tax gatherer who became one of the disciples of Jesus. Mark, the follower of St. Peter, whose teachings he set down. Luke, the Greek physician, who wrote the third Gospel and recorded the Acts of the Apostles. And John, the fisherman, called the disciple Jesus loved, whose Gospel expresses the divinity of Christ. In the middle of the 10th century, a note was added to the manuscript recording the names of the craftsmen who made it, allowing us to establish where, when, and why it was made. The Lindisfarne Gospels was written and illuminated in honour of God and of St. Cuthbert, here in this still isolated place in the northeast of England. Lindisfarne, now known as Holy Island, lies off the coast of Northumberland and is cut off completely twice every day at high tide. Today, the island supports a small local community of about 200 people, most of whom depend for their living on the many tourists who visit every year. They're able to cross easily from the mainland at low water on a metalled causeway in relative safety, provided they adhere strictly to the tide timetable. In the 7th and 8th centuries, things were very different. Lindisfarne was one of the most vigorous and important centres of Anglo-Saxon Christianity, and its celebrated religious community drew visitors from far and wide. Their easiest means of approach was by a 1.5 mile trek across the sands, where dedicated modern pilgrims still follow a footpath marked out by wooden stakes. It is not difficult to imagine how ideal the island must have appeared to the Anglo-Saxon monks in their quest for safety, solitude, and a oneness with God and nature. Nothing now remains of the original wooden monastery, founded in 635 by St. Aidan, who was brought from the Irish monastery at Iona by King Oswald of Northumbria. But a modern statue of St. Aidan stands near the ruins of the Norman priory, later built on this site. Lindisfarne's Anglo-Saxon monastic tradition ended in the late 9th century, when Viking attacks forced the monks to flee to the mainland. In 1083, Benedictine monks were sent from Durham to establish a new community. They brought with them the architectural details from their magnificent Norman Mother Church, reflected in the columns of the priory's nave, which echo those of Durham Cathedral itself. Of the Anglo-Saxon St. Cuthbert of Lindisfarne, in whose honour the manuscript was made, a great deal is known from two biographies written soon after his death in 687. One is by an anonymous member of his own monastic community, the other by the Venerable Bede, the father of English history, whose sources included accounts of Cuthbert supplied by people who had actually known him. Cuthbert was born about the time that Aidan arrived on Lindisfarne from Iona, and was educated in the monastery at Melrose. After many years preaching across Northumbria, gaining much respect as a visionary with miraculous powers, he became prior of Lindisfarne soon after the Synod of Whitby in 664 had resolved the differences between the Celtic and Roman churches. Bede describes Cuthbert as a forbearing man and a mediator, even in the face of insults and obstruction. He was, says Bede, wonderfully patient and unsurpassed in enduring physical and mental hardship. These qualities sustained him when he withdrew from the monastic community to seek solitude in the life of a hermit. First here, on this tiny islet a few yards off the shore of Lindisfarne itself, and later on the larger, more isolated island of Lindisfarne. Here, he lived alone for several years, but never quite managed to escape his own growing reputation as a holy man. His solitude disturbed by those seeking his help and guidance. Today, the Farne Islands are owned by the National Trust and protected as a bird sanctuary. This is fitting, as Cuthbert's own close association with birds and animals is well documented. Among the many accounts of the saint's miracles, Bede relates the story of Cuthbert and the ravens. The birds were tearing straw from the roof of the house where visitors stayed on Lindisfarne in order to build their own nests. When Cuthbert saw this, he ordered them to leave, and they flew off, only to return 3 days later to beg his forgiveness and offer a gift of pig's lard to waterproof the shoes of the saint's guests. Cormorants, shags, fulmars, terns, eider ducks, and many other species nest in the Farne Islands under the protection of the Wild Birds Order. Cuthbert himself is said to have made special provision for the welfare of the eider duck, and these birds are still known as Cuddy's ducks in his honour. Images of birds are a special and distinctive feature of the illumination of the Lindisfarne Gospels. And although they're highly stylised and in no sense representative of living creatures, it's easy to believe that they were inspired by the teeming bird life on the islands, which we still enjoy today. Cuthbert's withdrawal from the world was not to last. Egfrith, king of Northumbria, persuaded the saint to return to Lindisfarne as bishop in 685, and for almost 2 years he bore the burden of pastoral responsibilities before returning in his last illness to the Inn of Farne. There he died on the 20th of March 687. He himself would have preferred a hermit's grave on his beloved island, but accepting that in death he would be venerated as a saint by the Lindisfarne community, he agreed that his body should be taken back to the monastery church. There he was interred in a stone tomb to await an appropriate time for his bones to be raised to the altar. During the 11 years after Cuthbert's death, the monastic church was improved and a carved oak chest was made to receive his relics. When his tomb was finally opened in 698, his body was found to be miraculously still whole, in further proof of his sainthood. His shrine was placed beside the altar and became the focus of the church and the goal of numerous pilgrims. It was probably during the same 11 years that the Lindisfarne Gospels was made by 2 members of the community, Eadfrith, who wrote and decorated the whole manuscript, and Ethelwald, who was responsible for its original binding. Both men were afterwards successively bishops of Lindisfarne, and Eadfrith, to whom both biographies of Cuthbert were dedicated, seems to have been the principal force behind the growing popularity of Cuthbert's cult. The names of Eadfrith and Ethelwald appear in the manuscript in the colophon, or note, added to the book in the mid-10th century, by Aldred, a member of the community of St. Cuthbert during the time when it was settled at Chesterley Street, a few miles north of Durham. Aldred's main contribution to the book, already 2.5 centuries old, was a word-by-word translation of the Latin Gospel text, written between the lines and clearly visible on the page. This translation is important in its own right, because it represents the earliest surviving version of the Gospels in any form of the English language. In modern words, Aldred's colophon reads, Eadfrith, Bishop of the Lindisfarne Church, originally wrote this book for God and for St. Cuthbert, and jointly for all the saints whose relics are in the island. And Ethelwald, Bishop of the Lindisfarne Islanders, impressed it on the outside and covered it, as he well knew how to do. And Bilfrith the anchorite forged the ornaments which are on it on the outside, and adorned it with pure gold, and with gems, and with gilded over silver, pure metal. And Aldred, unworthy and most miserable priest, glossed it in English between the lines with the help of God and St. Cuthbert. A Victorian stained glass window in the parish church of Chesterley Street commemorates the local connection with the Lindisfarne Gospels with images of all four men. Eadfrith, copying the Latin text, Ethelwald and Bilfrith at work on the binding, and Aldred writing his gloss in Anglo-Saxon. The making of the manuscript would have been a long, drawn-out process, a labour of piety and love. There were no machines to produce paper, no printing presses to run off multiple copies, and no methods of mass production to form and decorate bindings. The pages of the Gospels are made of vellum prepared from the finest quality calf skins. Each double leaf would require one perfect skin, so the 258 leaves in the Gospels represent almost 130 animals. Once cut to a size of approximately 24 by 15 inches, the sheets were placed in piles of 4 and folded down the middle to make the gatherings of 8 leaves in which this book is arranged. Evidence of some of the practical stages in the writing and decorating of the manuscript can still be seen. The text area was marked out by pricking with a sharp instrument such as a stylus or small knife. The holes go right through each of the gatherings of 8 leaves. Each separate page was then ruled lightly with a hard, dry point to guide the script, which was written in a very dark brown, almost black ink, containing carbon particles from soot or lamp black. Eadfrith would have used a pen cut from a reed or a bird's feather, both of which were readily obtainable in the immediate neighbourhood of the monastery. The pen had to be recut or replaced frequently during the copying of the manuscript. In some places, preliminary drawing for the construction of the elaborate decorative designs is visible. It's hard to believe that Eadfrith, consummate artist though he was, could have constructed all his designs directly onto the vellum surface without experimenting first. He may have tried out his ideas on a wooden tablet, hollow on one side to hold a layer of wax, onto which he could draw repeatedly, using a bronze or bone stylus. The flat end, or spatula, is intended to smooth the wax for reuse. The range of pigments used to colour the decoration was large and varied, drawn from animal, vegetable and mineral raw materials. Some of these would have been available locally. Others were imported from Mediterranean sources. The most exotic is the blue lapis lazuli, whose only source was Badakhshan in the foothills of the Himalayas. Its use in the manuscript is evidence of the extraordinary range of European trading links in the 7th century. However, gold appears hardly at all in this manuscript, not because it wasn't available, but rather because it was not yet regarded as appropriate for use in book decoration. However, it was used lavishly on the outer covers, as Aldred's colophon records. All of the pigments would have been prepared by the artist himself, using egg white or fish glue as a simple binding medium. The text of the Lindisfarne Gospels follows the Vulgate of St. Jerome, a revision of the Latin Bible commissioned in the 4th century by Pope Damasus. The manuscript begins with Jerome's letter to the Pope, prefaced by a decorative carpet page and a magnificent display of initials and ornamental letters. This is in fact the simplest of the 5 double-page compositions in the manuscript. It is followed by a series of 16 pages of elegantly arcaded canon tables. Canon tables enable the reader to identify parallel passages in the 4 Gospels. The arcades themselves offer Eadfrith an opportunity for a virtuoso display of design, alternating panels of animal and ribbon interlace in a variety of contrasting colours. Here, minute animals are contorted into the bases and capitals of the pillars within stepped spaces less than an inch in height. The text is written out in the formal script known as Insula Majuscule, developed in early Christian Ireland and brought to Lindisfarne from Iona by Aidan and his companions. It reflects the close cultural interaction between Britain and Ireland during the early Anglo-Saxon period. However, Eadfrith would also have been familiar with the work of the great scriptorium at the double foundation of Wearmouth Jarrow, home of the Venerable Bede, and only 40 miles south of Lindisfarne. Indeed, the manuscript from which he copied his text was almost certainly one of the Gospels which had been brought to the monastery from Italy. His decision to write out the manuscript in 2 columns may also have been influenced by this model. Manuscripts produced at Wearmouth Jarrow were largely written in a fine classical uncial script, imitating the books brought from Italy and Gaul by their founder, Benedict Biscop, and his friend and successor, Ceolfrith. Both men had travelled extensively and returned to Northumbria with many treasures. They also imported craftsmen who produced, amongst other things, the first stained glass recorded in England. Fragments of this, discovered during excavation, have recently been inserted into an original window aperture in St. Paul's Church at Jarrow, a building which has stood on the site since Bede's time. When Aldred later added his gloss to the Gospels, he used another form of script, insula minuscule. Smaller, quicker to write, and much less formal than Eadfrith's stately hand, this was normally used for copying less important books, including those written in Anglo-Saxon. The earliest known copy of Bede's most famous work, the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, now in Cambridge University Library, is written in minuscule. The script covers the page very closely, in contrast to the spaciousness of Eadfrith's work. The beginning, or opening of each of the 4 Gospels, is marked by a group of 3 magnificent illuminated pages, an illustration of the appropriate evangelist, followed by a double-page opening with a cross-carpet page of pure decoration, and a grand display page, on which a large initial is followed by lines of display capitals in varying sizes. The evangelists are adapted from classical sources, though Eadfrith has imposed his own style upon them. Their names are given in Greek, though written in the Latin alphabet. Each is accompanied by his traditional symbol. For Matthew, a winged figure of a man blowing a trumpet. And these apparently came from a different source, for they're labelled in Latin. Matthew alone is seen with a second figure, a man with a halo and a book peering out from behind a curtain. No totally satisfactory explanation of this figure has ever been proposed. The Matthew carpet page is obviously based on the form of a large metal cross, which appears to have enamelled studs at the centre of each section. Both cross and background are filled with extremely complex interlaced designs. The background pattern is made up of combinations of long-legged birds and ribbon-shaped jointed beasts. An imperfection is introduced in the lower right-hand portion of the page, where a single one of these joints is decorated with a spiral design. Similar imperfections, apparently deliberate mistakes, can be identified throughout the book, and it is possible that Eadfrith was ensuring that his work could not claim a completeness appropriate only to the works of God, the Creator. The major initials on the first of the 2 initial pages from Matthew are balanced by panels of pure ornament on 3 sides. Here, Eadfrith combines knotwork, ribbon interlace, and curvilinear motifs with further bird-like images. The 2 letters ER on the first line are only partially painted, allowing us to see clearly the 3 animal heads extending out of the ends of the letters. The second major initial page in Matthew marks the beginning of the Christmas story. It is notable for a particularly fine example of the use of curvilinear ornament. Mark's Gospel follows. His symbol is a lion with a softly curling coat. The simple and regular ribbon interlace pattern which fills the ground of the Mark carpet page finds parallels in contemporary sculpture and stonework. However, the circular step pattern in the centre underlines Eadfrith's great debt to the jewellery and enamel work of his own and earlier periods. The Sutton Hoo ship burial, uncovered in Suffolk in 1939, provides us with the finest and richest examples of metal and jewel work for comparison with the Lindisfarne Gospels. Among the treasures found in the grave were these exquisite and unique gold and garnet shoulder clasps. The geometric design in garnets and millefiori glass is very similar to the stepped pattern on the carpet page from Mark's Gospel. Also from Sutton Hoo came a great hanging bowl with 6 escutcheons around its outer rim. Their coloured enamels, inset with Millefiori glass, are also similar to designs used by Eadfrith, incorporated here into the initial at the beginning of Mark, and again on the second initial page in Matthew. The group of pages introducing Luke are the most familiar in the manuscript, largely because, falling about halfway through the book, they're the easiest to exhibit. The evangelist, bearded like Eadfrith's Matthew, is seated beneath his symbol, a calf, whose wings must surely have been based on close observation of the wings of a living bird. The cross-carpet page is geometric in design and contrasts sharply with the curves of the enormous queue which dominates this initial page, introducing the opening words to the Gospel. Quoniam quidem multi conati sunt, ordinare narrationem. This initial page is one of Eadfrith's most complex. The bow of the queue is filled with a cascade of interlocking spirals, once again echoing the enamel work of an earlier age. All the smaller letters on the page are set off by a precisely executed sea of red dots, each one a tiny blob of red lead pigment, delicately and individually placed on the surface of the vellum. Red dots are a feature throughout the book, but here they reach a pinnacle of perfection. It has been calculated that there are 10,600 of them on this single page, and given an optimum rate of 30 dots a minute, it would have taken Eadfrith approximately 6 hours to apply them. The influence of the rich local bird and animal life of Lindisfarne and the Farne Islands may also be reflected in this page, though it takes time to unravel the amazing intricacies of entwined heads and limbs into which the artist weaves his animals and birds. The practice of using this type of interlaced ornament was introduced into England by the Germanic invaders of the pre-Christian period, but the Lindisfarne Gospels provides the first surviving example in which birds appear alongside animals. Observations of the shags and cormorants of the Farne Islands may well lie behind Eadfrith's birds, with their long, strong legs, clearly patterned wings, and curved beaks. Animals, in forms suggestive of dogs and cats, also appear throughout the manuscript, in minor initials as well as on the major decorated pages. In one instance, the creature is easily identifiable. Here, on the Luke initial page, creeping down the right-hand margin, is a cat. Her legs and tail appear at the top, her elongated body, containing 8 birds, forms the border, and her paws and head crouch along the lowest line of capitals, apparently intent on further prey in the panel of bird interlace across the page. The detail extends to the whiskers, drawn in so delicately that they escape all but the closest scrutiny. This page can be compared with the equivalent page in one of the handful of other manuscripts to have survived from the 8th century, the once superb but now severely damaged copy of the Gospels, which is the greatest treasure of Lichfield Cathedral. In this manuscript too, the right-hand margin of the initial page to Luke is provided by an animal form, but its artist gives us a bird-filled monster with huge pointed teeth and ferocious claws, far removed from the subtlety and charm of Eadfrith's domestic cat. In fact, every aspect of the design of the Lichfield page seems hard and angular when contrasted with the fluid curves of Eadfrith's interpretation. The same is true of the accompanying cross-carpet page, superficially so similar to the carpet page from Matthew in the Lindisfarne Gospels, but conceived in straight lines, where Eadfrith employs gentle curves. The Lichfield Gospels was made several decades later than the Lindisfarne manuscript, and some of its design is so close to Eadfrith's work that it seems very likely its artist had seen and studied the earlier masterpiece. The last of the 4 Gospels, that of John, again begins with an illustration of its seated evangelist, accompanied by his symbol, an eagle. It gives every appearance of being based upon observation of the natural world, even the gradations of its feathers corresponding to those of a real bird. The cross-carpet page from John is a breathtaking whirlpool of interlaced birds, over which the fragmented sections of a cross are applied. Eadfrith's deliberate mistake here takes the form of a simple omission, as just one bird has a blue and pink wing less detailed than the others. Once recognised, it's hard to avoid seeing it, and a perfectionist such as Eadfrith is not likely to have made such an error out of simple carelessness. The initial page is a virtuoso performance, embracing an extraordinary range of different types of pattern and interlace, but introducing a single element not found elsewhere in the manuscript. This is a tiny human profile attached to a capital in the second line, just as stylized as the cat at the beginning of Luke, and equally full of character. A particular feature of Eadfrith's work throughout the manuscript is the series of lesser initials used to distinguish sections at the beginning of each Gospel. One of the finest of these is the letter P, with which St. Jerome's preface to the Gospels as a whole begins. Typically, it's several lines high and is followed by smaller decorated display letters, reflecting in miniature the great initial pages at the beginning of each Gospel. A mass of tiny red dots surrounds the letters, providing a background against which they stand out almost in relief. Two contrasting forms of the initial M demonstrate the variety of Eadfrith's design. The first, from the preliminaries to Matthew, combines with an A in a swirl of sensuous curves ending in animal heads. The second, from Mark, contains crouching cats within its more formal outlines and fearsome fanged monsters between its uprights. Few other surviving Anglo-Saxon manuscripts offer minor initials approaching the beauty and sophistication of those in the Lindisfarne Gospels. One is this damaged and much faded copy of the Gospels in the library of Durham Cathedral. It too was probably made at Lindisfarne, and by a contemporary of Eadfrith. Even though it is now in poor condition by comparison with the more famous book, its similarity is immediately apparent. Despite an eventful and at times dramatic history, the Lindisfarne Gospels has survived, as we can see, in remarkably fine and complete condition. It has clearly never been subjected to heavy use, unlike the worn and stained Durham Gospels, and was probably never intended to be used on any but the most ceremonial of occasions. It became a part of the treasure associated with the relics of St. Cuthbert, and for the first century of its existence remained with them in the monastery on Lindisfarne. But the fame and wealth of the monastery was soon to attract visitors other than the pilgrims to Cuthbert's shrine. In the fateful year of 793, the prows of a Viking raiding party beached upon the sands of Lindisfarne. Pagan warriors who cared nothing for the Christian God and his saints sacked the community. Many of the monks were slain, but others fled to the mainland, carrying with them the relics of their saint. This violation of a holy place shook the whole of Western Christendom, and Alcuin, a Northumbrian monk, writing from the court of Charlemagne, declared, "Never before has such a terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race, nor was it thought that such an inroad from the sea could be made." The island, once a safe haven from the turmoil of a pagan Northumbrian kingdom, had become an unprotected outpost on the very edge of European Christianity. Today, the Priory Museum on Holy Island houses a collection of Anglo-Saxon inscribed stones, grave markers and cross shafts. This one has the symbol of the cross on one side, and on the reverse, a procession of armed warriors brandishing swords and axes. Perhaps it commemorates the island as lost in a Viking raid. For a while, the community re-established itself on Lindisfarne, but the tranquility of the island had been shattered, and uneasiness grew as monastery after monastery across Northumbria was sacked by the Vikings. In 875, almost 100 years after the initial attack, the Brethren, led by Bishop Eadulf, finally abandoned their home, and taking all their treasures, set out to seek a safer sanctuary elsewhere. After more than 7 years of wandering, they eventually settled at Chesterley Street, where they remained for the next century. It was during this time that Aldred added his English translation to the Gospels. At the end of the 10th century, the Viking terror reached even their new inland home. In 995, guided by their saint, the members of St. Cuthbert's community found a final resting place at Durham, on a high plateau protected on almost every side by steep banks falling away to the River Wear. Here, they built a church to house the saint's relics and the treasures of his shrine. The Norman conquest in 1066 heralded a fresh upheaval. The existing Anglo-Saxon religious community was ousted from the church at Durham to be replaced by Benedictine monks. A magnificent new cathedral was begun in 1093, and on the 29th of August, 1104, the shrine of St. Cuthbert was ceremonially positioned behind the high altar of the Norman church. Today, Cuthbert's bones rest beneath this simple slab, where pilgrims still come to honor his memory. The Lindisfarne Gospels remained among the treasures of the shrine throughout the Middle Ages. When Henry VIII's commissioners dissolved Durham Cathedral Priory in 1539, the manuscript was apparently among those items picked out to be sent to London, probably because it still had its original and valuable jeweled binding. Stripped of this, but nevertheless attractive to Tudor antiquaries interested in the Old English of Aldred's translation, it made its way into the library of the famous Elizabethan bibliophile Sir Robert Cotton. This library became one of the foundation collections of the British Museum in 1753, and later of the British Library when it was created in 1973. Although the manuscript left the north of England for a permanent home in London more than 450 years ago, it has never ceased to fascinate successive generations associated with its former homes. Durham's pride in the manuscript found fresh expression in 1852, when Bishop Edward Maltby put up the sum of 60 guineas to pay for a new and more suitable binding for the Gospels. This inspired a Victorian masterpiece in silver encrusted with semi-precious stones, which is today recognized as an outstanding example of early archaeological revival metalwork. Every decorative detail is drawn from the manuscript itself. As we have seen, the church at Chester Street boasts a magnificent window dedicated to the craftsman who made the Lindisfarne Gospels. On Holy Island itself, the chancel of the parish church is covered with a carpet, hand-embroidered locally, which faithfully recreates the design of the cross-carpet page introducing the Gospel of St. Mark. Indeed, Eadfrith's supreme skill still inspires artists and craftsmen working a wide variety of media, from stonework to jewellery to knitwear, while at the same time, scholars continue to pore over the pages of the manuscript in search of fresh insights into the distant and exciting age which produced it. Meanwhile, every day, scores of visitors from all over the world come to the exhibition galleries of the British Library to marvel at the inspiration and beauty of the Lindisfarne Gospels, written around 1,300 years ago in honor of God and of St. Cuthbert.